Hi, welcome back to The Professor Speaks. I'm Rafael Chacón, Director of the Montana Museum of Art and Culture and Professor of Art History and Criticism at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana in the Western United States. It's a pleasure to welcome you back to our course on Roman and early Christian art. And this is part two of a discussion of the Flavian dynasty, that is the second dynasty to rule in the Roman imperial throne after the Julio-Claudians. So let's share our screen and return to the story of the Flavians. Bear with me for a second while I put up the PowerPoint. So as we discussed in our last conversation, the Flavian dynasty began with the Emperor Vespasian, who in fact took over the throne after a very unstable year, the year 68 to 69, in which four emperors vied for the throne, and Vespasian came out the victor in that struggle. Vespasian was succeeded by his son Titus, and again, as I mentioned in our last discussion, Titus is the first biological heir of a Roman emperor to sit on the throne. So we're going to continue that story, but first let's recap. Let's go back and talk about the most important construction of the Flavian period, and that's the Colosseum, the Flavian amphitheater. And remember that this was built over the ruins of the Neronic palace, the palace of Nero, at the southern end of the Roman Forum. And again, this was a structure that was an incredible feat of engineering for the Romans, and it was also a great public amenity that brought great fame and power to the imperial throne, and particularly the Flavians. They were seen as actually being quite popular with the Roman masses, especially after a series of weak and ineffective and unpopular rulers in that year 68. And again, what we're looking at here are some images of the Colosseum or the Flavian amphitheater, both modern images and ancient images as best as we can. And one of the things that I wanted to note about the Flavian amphitheater was that in its day, in fact, it was a quite functional structure. It was a very well-designed structure. The point of it was, in fact, to accommodate thousands of people on various tiers. And of course, these tiers were ranked depending on the class of the individuals. So the closer you were to the games and the events, the wealthier you were, and the higher up in the bleachers, if you will, in the stands, the poorer you were. But nevertheless, the point that there was incredible visibility anywhere from the Colosseum of the events that took place down in the arena. And by the way, that's a very important name, arena. We'll talk about that shortly. But what I'm showing you here are two diagrams. One is a cross section in the lower right of that amphitheater. So it gives you a sense how the building was built with the arena in the lower right-hand corner here at the ground level. And by the way, there were levels below the Colosseum. Remember, this was built on an ancient lake bed, so they were able to dig down and create chambers below the structure, and we'll talk more about those shortly. And then you had these stands built in this kind of oval fashion, ascending surrounding that arena. And those stands, in fact, are the bleachers where people actually sat. They were all made out of stone, covered in marble, the lowest ones being the most beautifully appointed for the wealthier members or the patricians in Roman society, and then they became sort of meaner as you went up or as you ascended higher up the bleachers themselves. And then below those bleachers were hallways, enormous large rings. They're called annular rings that surrounded the structure. And it was those hallways and passageways that allowed people to enter the seating and also to quickly exit the structure. They say that within half an hour, the building could be filled, and then with something like 15 minutes, it could be emptied out. I mean, it's truly a remarkable feat of design. Originally, the building, as you can see, was a series of arches allowing air to flow through it, at least through the passageways underneath the stands. And then those arches were, in fact, had in them statues of the gods and heroes of the Roman world. And then up above, as you can see in that uppermost station, there were a series of posts or beams, wooden beams, that held a very interesting structure known as the velarium. And the velarium was a canvas covering that went over the stadium. So it was not entirely open to the air above. That velarium, that structure, hung was suspended over with a very complicated rigging system over the stadium. We'll talk more about the velarium shortly when I show you this image of it. But here what you're seeing are tourists walking across a gangway, a rebuilt area over the arena itself. Now imagine that the chambers that you're looking there at the lowest part of your image are the structures in the basement of the building. There were down below a series of passageway and rooms where gladiators could meet and get ready for the sports that took place up in the arena. Animals in cages were kept down there, and very interesting elevator structures were also kept down there, allowing, in fact, the animals and the gladiators, the performers, to emerge out of the ground through the wooden floor of the arena. And the reason why this area is called an arena, and we tend to use that term today in all kinds of sports venues, is because there was a wooden floor here that covered the lowest levels of the amphitheater, and then above that was, at least a foot of sand. And it was on that sand. The sand was the substrate upon which the sports took place. And then that arena was then surrounded by the seating, the marble seating, the stone seating of the stands, which, as you can see from this photograph, is mostly gone. All of that material was looted, plundered, raided during the Middle Ages after the collapse of the Roman capital. So as were the chambers down below. The arena itself, the wooden beams that held the floor of the arena are gone. And that's actually, by the way, where a lot of today's archaeology is taking place, to discover more about not only the structure, but also the activities that took place in this very, very impressive feat of ancient engineering. So this is an artist's rendering of what the interior of that space looked like. So the floor in the center was covered, and then it had a layer of sand. They also say that the space could be flooded. Remember, this is an ancient lake bed here, but that the space could actually be flooded to show sea battles and that sort of thing in this space. And then you can see there the bleachers or the stands themselves covered with marble and stone. It would have been a beautiful structure to be in, and you can imagine the noise and the smells, because in fact people did cook and barbecue and grill, if you will, up on the uppermost levels where the masses gathered. And then up above, in that colonnaded area that you see there, above that were the posts and the beams that were used to hold the canvas top, or the velarium. And by the way, we know that the people who ran the rigging and manipulated and opened and closed that cloth covering were formerly sailors, or employed, or the state employed sailors to do that, because they understood knots and rigging and beams and that sort of thing. Here's another two beautiful cross sections showing us the stadium, and in the uppermost image you see that velarium outstretched. And then the image on the right shows you the complicated set of elevators and trap doors that existed on the floor of the arena and below the arena to accommodate gladiators and the animals. And of course, there were many animals that were used in battles and in Roman sport. Some people say that we moderns in the modern world would recognize ancient Rome. We would feel completely at home in it. And one aspect of that is, of course, our love of sport, mass sports, and to a certain extent, our love of carnage. So in the modern world, we have aspects of this, but probably nothing as brutal as what the Romans witnessed in this Flavian amphitheater. So that is that Colosseum is in fact the most important contribution of the Flavian dynasty and the rule of Vespasian to the Roman world. Vespasian died in the year 79, and he was succeeded by the man you see here in this very abraded bust portrait. This is Titus. And Titus's own reign ended unexpectedly. People had great hopes, particularly Vespasian, for Titus, because he was indeed a formidable figure. But Titus had a very short rule, from 79 to 81, and he died of an illness. He wasn't killed, he wasn't murdered, he wasn't assassinated, he didn't commit suicide. He died of a fever, and in the year 81, dashing the hopes of many of the Flavians. So Vespasian is considered a good emperor because, in fact, he ruled for so long. Titus was also considered a good emperor because he ruled very much in his father's footsteps. But again, we don't know whether ultimately he would have been a successful emperor or not, because his reign was in fact so short. Vespasian actually had rose to power underneath both in the shadow of the Julio-Claudians, but also underneath the shadow of his father. And his greatest feats happened during the time when his father was campaigning in Judea. And in 69, he besieged and captured Jerusalem. And in the year 70, Titus was identified with the destruction of the Jewish temple in the city of Jerusalem in the year 70. So for many people, particularly for descendants of Jews and for Jewish historians, Titus was the most evil of the Roman emperors because he destroyed their temple. And there is a monument in Rome today, the Arch of Titus, which actually commemorates that triumph. So that which is seen as a great triumph for the Romans is actually seen as a low moment in the history of the Jewish people. And so we'll talk more about that when we discuss the arch made to commemorate the triumph of Titus and the Flavians in Judea. But nevertheless, he worked his way up the ranks of the empire, particularly in the uppermost classes under his father's rule. And then in 79, upon his father's death, he assumed the throne. And historians like Suetonius actually declared him to be a good emperor, even though he ruled for barely 3 years. He completed his father's Colosseum, and then actually supervised, and again, I mentioned in part 1 of this discussion on the Flavians, I mentioned that the year 79 was an important date, not only because of the death of Vespasian, but also because Rome saw 2 very important disasters. One was an enormous fire in the capital city in Rome. And then also in 79, we had the eruption of Mount Vesuvius on the coast, destroying many of the Roman cities and towns and villas on that coastline. And we will talk about that destruction, that very, very important volcanic eruption in the year 79. We'll discuss that in later lectures. Anyway, barely over 2 years later, he dies, Titus dies, and the Senate then places his younger brother, Domitian, that is Vespasian's son, on the throne. And we'll talk about Domitian shortly. So here's an image of Titus as a young man. And if I can advance my image, and some later images of him as a mature man, and we see him there on a coin on the right, and a bust sculpture on the left, and another one there. And the likeness to his father is apparent in these bust portraits. So he looks a lot like Vespasian, only a younger version of him, if you will. But we have that same kind of funny grin and the bulbous nose, and even the similar structure to the forehead. But he is definitely his father's son, as you can see from these images. And here we see him as he would have looked at the time that he assumed the throne. So these bust portraits were done more than likely around the time that he became the emperor. And there is, in fact, an image of his daughter, Julia, a portrait of his daughter. And then I'm showing you a modern painting. This is actually the work of Giulio Romano, and this was done in 1630, so it's a Baroque painting. And it's a very interesting image because it shows Titus entering the city of Rome, bringing back the spoils of his campaigns in Judea. And you'll notice there on the right, they're going through an archway, and what you see that is being carried is the golden menorah that that arched form there that you see are the candelabrum, if you will, that was at the heart of the Jewish temple in Judea. And the woman that you see there being led by the hair, bound and taken underneath that Roman arch, is a representation of Judea. So that's an allegory, an allegorical figure, not a real woman, a woman who stands for Judea now subjugated, now controlled. And the act of destroying the temple was considered by the Romans a great feat, obviously, and it put the Jews in their place, so to speak, a people that always chafed under Roman rule and for centuries fought against the Romans and made life very difficult for the Roman state in that part of the Mediterranean. So again, this is a modern painting, so it's a 17th century painting showing us the way that this Italian Baroque artist envisioned the triumph of Titus and his return to Italy, return to Rome as the victor of the Judean campaign. And that structure that you see there in the foreground, just in front of the Colosseum, is indeed the Arch of Titus. This was put up by the Senate and the people of Rome in commemoration of his great feats in Palestine. It's a remarkable arch, if only because it has survived 2,000 years of history virtually intact. And so let me show you some images of that other Flavian monument. And again, here we see two Flavian monuments back to back. The Colosseum there, built by Vespasian, finished by Titus, and then the archway, the little archway that you see here in the center of this image, which commemorates Titus's own triumphs. And there it is. Now, I warn you, what you're seeing here is a structure that has indeed survived from ancient days, but it's in large part a reconstruction. Parts of it, like for example, I don't know if you can tell, but when you look at that image on the right, that you can see that the stonework there on the left side of it is in fact modern. It's in fact rebuilt, reconstructed. But the arch itself, that is the area that you can walk under to see the reliefs, the carvings, the vault, and the plaques that you see on the exterior of it are for the most part the actual ones that were there and that survived into modern times. This is an engraving in the 18th century of that arch, and there are two interesting features about it. One is that 1/3 of it, that is, in fact, is gone. The arch itself, the central part of it, is there. And then what you see on the right side is that buildings were actually built up right into it. All those buildings have been removed in modern times, allowing the arch to kind of come back to us. And in fact, that section there, that left third of it, has been rebuilt in the style of the original. So again, this building is, in fact, has survived in large part, but it is part also a modern reconstruction. And what I want to focus on are two things in this screen here. One is the plaque that stands over the archway, and it says, "The people, the Senate and the people of Rome dedicate the arch to divine Titus." Again, Titus being now a divine emperor. "Vespasian, Augustus, son of divine Vespasian." So Titus, Vespasian, Augustus, son of the divine Vespasian. So here is a monument that acknowledges both father and son of the Flavian clan. And this is not unusual to think of these men as both human, but also as divinities. And that, of course, that tradition starts with Augustus and his treatment of Julius, his father, Julius Caesar. So what is very impressive about this archway is its carving and the quality of the carving and the fact that it's still there and intact. And what we see inside are a series of reliefs of the triumph of Titus. And the most important relief is that one which we see there in the lower right. And there's a very grainy black and white image of it. But what it shows us is Roman soldiers, victorious soldiers, returning to Rome with trumpets and the spoils. And among the spoils, prominently displayed, is the menorah of the Jewish temple. And you can see them bearing it aloft into Rome. We can actually imagine that a procession like this did take place through the Via Sacra, through the Roman Forum, that the soldiers entered with the loot, the goods of their military campaigns, and the Roman people shouted and celebrated and acknowledged the heroic victories of their soldiers. So a scene like this very likely took place on the spot where this arch, this commemorative arch, was built. So here's some more shots. This is the other relief on the lower right, showing us Titus on horseback on a quadriga, so 4 horses pulling his chariot, his triumphal chariot, entering the city. And then I want you to see the vaulting of that arch. This is what the average tourist can see when they actually go to the Roman Forum. You look up and you see the beautiful coffered ceiling of the vault, and in the middle of it, a square with the Roman imperial eagle, that emblem of the Roman state and its military power throughout the world. So a very impressive monument that survives to us from the times of the Flavians. Here's another detail of that relief of the soldiers bearing aloft the Roman menorah. So what is a victorious image, or was a victorious image for the Romans, was in fact an image of defeat and subjugation for the Jewish people. And it was a message, in fact, to the rest of the world, that Rome is a force to be contended, is to be respected, and to understood as the power of the Mediterranean world and Europe, and certainly Africa as well. So beware is what the message says. Oh, this will happen to you, and this is the punishment, the payment, if you will, for crossing and denying Rome its right to rule. Then the last image we have of Titus is again a modern image. This is a painting from 1885 by the glorious historicist English painter Sir Lawrence Alma-Tadema. And what he shows us is this image of the Titus, an elder man, on the day of his triumph, entering the city of Rome as the hero of this event, and will soon assume the throne, the imperial throne. And there in the distance, you can see the image of the Jewish menorah, the trophy, if you will, of his military campaigns. This is a wonderful painting. It shows sort of the jealousy of his brother, but the point is, Titus is supreme here in the Roman state. Titus was succeeded upon his death and his short reign by his brother Domitian. And Domitian rules from 81 to 96. He is the third and the last of the Flavian emperors. So remember, Vespasian passes the throne to his son Titus, and then Titus, the throne passes to his younger brother Domitian upon his death. Titus, according to the histories, always lived in the shadow of his brother, the more successful, Domitian lived under the shadow of his more successful brother Titus, who gained his fame down in Judea. He also held many offices under his father Vespasian, but no real responsibilities. So he is considered a less than successful emperor, and Christian scholars would later declare Domitian a bad emperor because of his treatment of the Christian community, the earliest Christian community. He was declared emperor by the Praetorian Guard, and he had a reign that lasted 15 years, so longer than any emperor since Tiberius, even longer than his father Vespasian's. But his rule ended violently with his assassination in the year 96. And here's an image of the young Domitian, again, as a hero. This comes from the Labicum. And there we see Domitian as a young hero. Again, it's the body of a god with the head of an actual Roman patrician. Here's another image of Domitian, both in a bust portrait on the left and a coin on the lower right. One of the things that, and again, he is his father's son. He looks like, he has the genes of a good Flavian. He is in fact the son of Vespasian. He looks like his brother Titus, but he has a distinctive overbite, which you see in his portraits. Here's another one again, and it seems like the Flavian smile is there, but it's diminished. But nevertheless, the very distinctive overbite for the young Domitian. Here's a relief sculpture that was actually only discovered in the 1930s. It's a series of panels, and this was an altar, a public monument set up in the city. This was excavated and discovered, and it is a very interesting monument. It shows us the arrival of Vespasian to Rome and the departure. So the Roman emperors had ceremonies upon their arrival to the capital, and then upon their departures, there were often a lot of fanfare surrounding them. They were blessings, a kind of religious ceremony to make sure that their passage in and out of the capital city was marked and celebrated and acknowledged and sanctified. And so this is a relief showing the adventus of Vespasian. So there we see, in fact, Vespasian on the right here in a toga, surrounded by members of the court. And among the individuals that is there at that adventus, at that passage, is Domitian. And here is, in fact, a portrait of the son Domitian. So there is the father Vespasian in doing a kind of blessing gesture, and there is, in fact, the son Domitian to receive that gesture. This is a monument put up during the time of Domitian. Clearly, the emperor wanted to be associated by, if the son Titus, his elder brother, got his monument, then the son would make sure that he also was represented as being blessed by his very successful father, Vespasian. And this is, in fact, the Profectio. So this is the matching relief. And this one actually is in better state than the Adventus image. And again, here we have an image of Domitian now, and that's the figure that you see here. But a very interesting thing has happened to the sculpture, and we'll talk about it shortly. I just want to finish by mentioning that not only is the emperor surrounded by his men, the military men, but he's also surrounded by gods and goddesses. So not only does he have the blessing of the father, as we can see here, the previous emperor, who is a divinized figure, a divine being now, he's also blessed by the presence of gods like Jupiter, Mars, Athena, Diana, etc., other Greco-Roman gods there to, in fact, make sure that his comings and goings are, in fact, protected by the religious realm. This is a very interesting image. This is a likeness of Domitian, but it doesn't look like Domitian. And the reason for that is interesting, because what happened is that later, when another emperor assumes the throne, and that man is Nerva, we're going to talk about him shortly as we wrap up our discussion of the Flavians, Nerva had his image carved over or out of the portrait of Domitian. What happened is that upon Domitian's death, the state declared a damnatio memoriae, that is, they damned his memory and they erased the evidence of his rule. Such was the way that Domitian's reign ended. So remember, he's considered a bad emperor by historians and contemporaries. And as part of that damnatio memoriae, they recarved this monument, removing his portrait, altering it, carving it down with the portrait of the new emperor. And that is the man that you see there. So that is a portrait of Nerva, but it's the body of Domitian. It started as an image, a monument to Domitian, and it ended as a monument to Nerva. And this is what was discovered in the early 20th century by archaeologists working in the capital city. And they rebuilt the monument and reconstructed it, and now it's an interesting testament to the passage of power from one emperor to the next, and not an easy flow of power. So one of the great achievements of the rule of Domitian is actually the square that you see here today, and this is known as the Piazza Navona in Rome. It's one of the most popular squares in the capital city. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. It's a wonderful place to hang out, and considered one of those sort of iconic places for tourists in the city of Rome today. But if you see this from the air, you'll notice a very interesting shape to this square. So you have this large, elongated oval here with the building surrounding it. It's flat on one end, that is the end that you see here, and then semicircular at the other end. That structure should be familiar to us, because that is the structure of the Roman circus. And in fact, that is the site of a very, very important Roman circus. And it was a circus that was built during the rule of Domitian. So think about the monuments that the Flavians built: the Colosseum, the arches, the monument that we see here to Domitian and his father, and now a circus. So an enormous a structure that for horse races, chariot races, that sort of thing. And even though the structure itself is gone, the shape of it, in the urban fabric of Rome, is still there in this celebrated Piazza Navona. The piazza is known for not just its wonderful space, but it's also known for its beautiful architecture, among them the Church of Sant'Agnese that you see here, designed by Francesco Borromini in the early 18th century, and then the sculpture and the fountains across in the middle of the square, designed by the famous Bernini, the rival sculptor Bernini. And actually, this is a wonderful photograph because these two men were indeed rivals, and there's the figure that you see there in Bernini's sculpture seems to be looking up at Borromini's church, kind of like in horror at its poor design, according to Bernini. So the rivalry is there in this kind of symbolic fashion between architecture and sculpture. But here's an image, an 18th century reconstruction of what that circus looked like during the time of the Flavians. So this is the Piazza Navona back in the minds, if you will, of architects, an architectural designer of the 18th century. And again, it's in the classic Roman circus fashion, where you have a sharp facade or end point, a squared end point, and then a circular turn at the other end, and then monuments like obelisks in the center of the thing. And then the chariots, of course, would go around in the track. And then the stadium, actually in this case, the colonnades surrounding it, where people could actually see the circus, the races from above. And there are fragments of Domitian's amphitheater, or excuse me, stadium or circus. And there are some of the fragments that you see down in the lowest, below the street levels of modern day Rome today. So some of the arched entries to that, the circus that was built by Domitian during his long reign. So upon the death of Domitian, his demise, a man by the name of Nerva assumed the throne. And Nerva was not a biological relative of the Flavians, but he is identified with the Flavian dynasty because he was a loyal member of the Flavian dynasty. He became emperor at the age of 65, after a lifetime of service to the empire, starting with Nero. So he saw that whole transition through the bad year of 68. And then he saw this, he was there during the rule of Vespasian, the rule of Titus, the rule of Domitian. And it was after Domitian's death that he becomes emperor in the year 96. A very, very old man. He did not have a long rule himself. But apparently was considered a good emperor because he restored some of the liberties, the rights of the Roman citizens that were curtailed by Domitian. Apparently his very, very brief reign was marred by financial difficulties and a kind of an inability to assert power. Kind of beneficent, but an ineffective ruler in the end. Problems with the army and as well as the Senate. And there are actually very few monuments identified with Nerva because of his short reign as well, but he is in fact an important transitional figure and the closing figure of the Flavian dynasty, if you will. In October of the year 97, he was forced to adopt a younger and more popular general by the name of Trajan as his heir. Trajan would turn out to be a very important Roman emperor. And after 15 months in office, Nerva will die of natural causes. He was succeeded and deified by Trajan, so treated with a great honor and respect as his successor. Or excuse me, as his predecessor. And these are some bust portraits of Nerva. He is, again, biologically not a Flavian, so he looks different. He has a kind of long, thin face, a long, attenuated nose. And these are some bust portraits of Nerva, quite a distinctive face, easily recognizable among Roman bust portraits, imperial bust portraits. And there are some coins with that likeness of that skinny face and long nose. And I want to point out that the only thing that we know that Nerva built in Rome is a forum. So let me just show you again where we are in this wonderful map of the Roman Forum. Here is the Via Sacra, the Holy Way, bringing us from the Colosseum past the Arch of Titus, working its way past the Temple of the Divine Julius Caesar up to the Capitoline Hill here on the left. And then, of course, on the right, we have the famous Forum of Julius Caesar with its accompanying Forum of Augustus. Now, ignore what you see here because these are all later constructions, as is this here. But next to the Forum of Julius and the Forum of Augustus, Nerva built a forum. And this is the forum, the skinny, long, skinny. So think about Nerva as having a long, skinny face and a long, skinny forum. So a long, skinny forum with a colonnade left and right of it and a temple to the goddess Minerva. The Greeks knew her as Athena, the Romans as Minerva, and here is a small temple to her here at the end of his forum. And more than likely, there was a plinth with a statue of the Emperor Nerva here. So nothing nearly as big or as grand as Julius Caesar or as Augustus, and that is certainly true. But unlike the Flavians who did not build fora, he did. So he picks up an older tradition of what an emperor should build, and this was actually his little forum tucked in here. The Romans later call this the forum transitorium, so the transitional forum from one to the next. So it's almost like Nerva is an afterthought or a footnote or a transitory or an ellipsis between one to the next, from one important emperor to the next. So, so Nerva's forum, and let's just take a look at some of that. It was actually quite a beautiful space, and the details, the fragments of it actually indicate that at one time it was indeed a beautiful, glorious space. So this is a detail of the side walls with the colonnade, with these beautiful Corinthian capitals and a very ornate entablature above it with a relief. And then above that, plaques with images of gods and goddesses and heroes of the Roman world above. So that's the elements of the Forum of Nerva. And on that note, and actually here's another detail of it, we will end this discussion. And this is in fact the closure, the end of the Flavian dynasty in Roman history and its art and architectural history. Thank you very much. Please subscribe to my channel on YouTube, and I hope to see you at our next discussion when we begin to talk about the rule of the great Emperor Trajan. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.